I still remember the way my daughter-in-law Lauren laughed when she picked up my old sewing box and called it a useless pile of junk. She said it right there at my dinner table in front of my own son. I swallowed my pride that night, but hours later, when that same box was opened, the room went silent. Because inside, it wasn't thread or needles that mattered. It was a birth certificate that proved a truth I had buried for over 40 years. If this story stirs something in you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And I'd really love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done in my place? Sometimes sharing your thoughts helps more than you think. My name is Jenna Emerson, and for most of my life, I've been the kind of woman people overlook. I live in a small, quiet town just outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where the mailman still waves, where neighbors remember your birthday, and where nothing much changes except people. People always change, even when you wish they wouldn't. I've been a widow for nearly 20 years now. My husband Robert passed away from a heart condition when our son was just starting college. Back then, I didn't have time to fall apart. I had bills to pay, a house to keep, and a son who still needed his mother, even if he didn't always say it. So I did what I knew best. I sewed. For years, I worked out of the same little room in my house, taking in alterations, hemming dresses, fixing torn jackets. Brides trusted me with their gowns. Mothers brought me their children's clothes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. It kept food on the table and gave me something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. And through all those years, there was one thing I never let out of my sight: my sewing box. It wasn't pretty. Not by any modern standard, at least. The wood was scratched and faded, the hinges creaked when you opened it, and one corner had been glued back together after it fell years ago. But to me, it wasn't just a box. It was history, memory, something I couldn't replace no matter how many new things the world tried to offer. Most people didn't understand that, especially not Lauren. My son Ethan met Lauren Mitchell 5 years ago. They worked at the same company in downtown Columbus, some kind of marketing firm I never quite understood. He brought her home one Thanksgiving, and I remember thinking how polished she looked. Everything about her was sharper clothes, her smile, even the way she spoke. She wasn't unkind. Not at first. She hugged me when we met, told me she'd heard so much about me, complimented the house, the food, even the little handmade curtains in the kitchen. But there was something behind her eyes, something calculating, like she was taking inventory of everything around her and deciding what was worth keeping. They got married 2 years later. I wore a simple blue dress I made myself. Lauren wore something designer flown in from New York. Or so I was told at least 3 times that day. I remember standing in the corner of the reception, watching them dance, feeling both proud and strangely distant. Like I was watching my son step into a world I didn't belong to. After the wedding, things began to change slowly at first. Lauren liked things modern, clean, minimal. She once told me while sipping coffee at my kitchen table that clutter was a sign of emotional attachment people should learn to let go of. I smiled politely, but I remember my hands tightening around my mug. Because to me, those attachments were all I had left. Ethan started visiting less often. When he did come by, Lauren was always with him, and somehow, without ever raising her voice, she managed to make everything in my home feel outdated. She'd glance at the furniture and say, "Oh, this is very vintage." She'd touch the curtains and add, lighter fabrics would really open up the space. And once while looking around the living room, she said, "Have you ever thought about redecorating? Starting fresh, as if the life I had built here could just be erased and replaced with something trendier." I didn't argue. I never have been the kind of woman to fight over words, but I felt it. Every comment, every sideways glance, it all settled somewhere deep inside me. Still, I told myself she meant well. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We excuse things. We soften the edges of other people's behavior just to keep the peace for our children. But there was one thing Lauren never stopped noticing: the sewing box. It sat on a small table near my armchair, always within reach. Sometimes I'd open it just to adjust a button or fix a seam. Other times, I'd just look at it, run my fingers over the worn wood like it could still speak back to me. Lauren noticed that. Of course she did. The first time she mentioned it, she tilted her head slightly and asked, "Why do you keep that old thing out all the time?" I smiled and said, "It's useful." She laughed softly, not cruelly, but not kindly either. "I'm sure it is," she said. "But don't you think it kind of ruins the aesthetic of the room?" The aesthetic. I remember that word echoing in my mind long after she said it. I shrugged it off, told her I didn't mind, but from that moment on, I started noticing how often her eyes drifted toward it. How she'd pause just for a second every time she passed by that little table. Like it bothered her more than she wanted to admit, or maybe like it intrigued her. Ethan, on the other hand, barely seemed to notice any of it. He'd sit on the couch, scrolling through his phone, occasionally chiming in when Lauren spoke. If she suggested something, he'd nod. If she laughed, he'd smile. And when she made comments about my home, he never disagreed. He just stayed quiet. That silence hurt more than any words could have. I wanted him to say something, to remind her gently that this was his childhood home, that the things she dismissed so easily were part of the life that raised him. But he didn't, and I didn't ask, because somewhere deep down, I was afraid of the answer. One afternoon, not long after that first comment, Lauren walked over to the sewing box while I was in the kitchen. I saw her from the corner of my eye, her fingers hovering just above the lid. "Careful," I said a little sharper than I intended. She pulled her hand back immediately, turning to me with a small smile. "I was just curious," she said. "You treat it like it's something special." I forced a laugh. "It's just old." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. And maybe she knew it too. Because the way she looked at me in that moment, it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was suspicion. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. Fear. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that people rarely show you who they are all at once. They reveal themselves slowly, through small comments, passing glances, the way they react to things they think don't matter. And Lauren, she was beginning to reveal more than she probably intended. It started with little things. One afternoon, she came over while Ethan was at work. Said she just happened to be in the neighborhood, though I later realized she had driven nearly 40 minutes to get there. I invited her in anyway. That's what I've always done. Opened my door even when my heart wasn't entirely sure. She walked through the house like she was seeing it for the first time, even though she'd been there dozens of times before. Her eyes moved from the couch to the shelves to the framed photos on the wall. She paused in front of one picture, Ethan as a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, standing in the backyard with a crooked smile and grass stains on his jeans. "He looks different here," she said. I smiled softly. "He was a handful back then." She tilted her head. "No, I mean his features. Kids change, I know, but still." Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. "People grow into themselves," I replied carefully. "That's normal." She hummed, not fully convinced, and moved on. That should have been my first warning. But I ignored it. Because it was easier to pretend everything was fine than to admit something was starting to crack beneath the surface. Later that same afternoon, she drifted into the living room and stopped in front of my sewing box. Of course she did. She didn't touch it right away. Just stood there, arms crossed, studying it like it was some kind of puzzle. "You really keep this out all the time?" she asked. I was sitting in my armchair, mending a loose button on one of my old cardigans. "Yes," I said simply. She stepped closer, crouching slightly to get a better look. "It's charming, I guess, in a rustic kind of way." I didn't respond. She reached out, running her fingers along the scratched surface. I watched every movement, my needle pausing midair. "You could get something new," she continued. "Something cleaner, more modern. This looks like it belongs in an antique shop." "It works just fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "That's not really the point, though, is it?" she replied, glancing up at me. "It's abo ut how things look. Presentation matters." "It works just fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "That's not really the point, though, is it?" she replied, glancing up at me. "It's about how things look. Presentation matters." I set the cardigan in my lap and looked at her directly. "Not everything has to be about how things look." She smiled at that, but it wasn't a warm smile. "No," she said softly. "But sometimes what we choose to keep says more than we realize." The room felt smaller after that, heavier. I picked up my sewing again, trying to ignore the unease settling in my chest. But I could feel her watching me. Not just the box me, as if she were trying to figure something out. Over the next few weeks, the comments became more frequent. She'd mention how outdated my furniture was. Suggest I sell some of my things. Recommend stores where I could upgrade my home. Each suggestion was wrapped in politeness, but underneath it, there was something sharper. Judgment. And always, her eyes would return to that sewing box. One Sunday, Ethan came over without her. That was rare. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee the way we used to before his life became so busy, so distant. For a moment, it felt like old times. "How's work?" I asked. He shrugged. "Same as always. Busy." I nodded. "And Lauren?" He hesitated, just for a second. "She's good. You know how she is." I did. "Does she?" I began carefully say anything about coming here. He gave a small laugh. "Mom, she just likes things a certain way. Don't take it personally." I looked down at my hands. "I'm not," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. He followed my gaze, and for the first time, I noticed his eyes linger on the sewing box. "You still keep that thing out, huh?" he said. The words hit me harder than I expected. "Of course," I replied. "I use it." He nodded slowly, but there was something uncertain in his expression. "Lauren thinks it's kind of strange," he added. There it was. Not cruel, not harsh, but enough. I forced a small smile. Lauren thinks a lot of things. He didn't argue. That silence again. It settled between us like a wall neither of us knew how to climb. After he left, I sat in my armchair for a long time staring at the sewing box. I ran my fingers over the worn edges, tracing the cracks, the imperfections. Each mark told a story. Each scratch held a memory. Things Lauren would never understand. Things I had never told anyone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way she looked at Ethan's childhood photo, the way she questioned his features, the way she lingered on things that didn't quite add up. And then there was the box, always the box. It wasn't just that she disliked it. She was curious about it, too curious. A few days later, she came by again, this time with Ethan. They were both in unusually good spirits, which should have put me at ease. But it didn't. Because Lauren had that look again. the one where her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We sat down in the living room, making small talk. Ethan told me about work. Lauren chimed in occasionally, her tone light, almost playful. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she stood up and walked over to the sewing box. "Do you ever clean this out?" she asked casually. My heart skipped. "There's nothing to clean," I replied. She glanced over her shoulder. "Really? You've had it for years. You're telling me you've never thought about going through it?" "No," I said a little more firmly this time. She smiled again, but there was something different in it now. Something intentional. "I just think," she continued, lifting the lid slightly before I could stop her, "that sometimes people hold on to things because they're afraid of what they might find if they let them go." "Lauren," I said sharply. She froze. Slowly, she lowered the lid and turned to face me. Ethan looked between us, confused. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Lauren said quickly, though her eyes never left mine. "I was just curious, but I knew better. Because in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. This wasn't about old furniture or outdated decor. This was about something deeper, something she was getting closer to piece by piece. And as I sat there staring at that box, the one thing I had guarded for decades, I realized something that made my stomach twist. Lauren wasn't just judging my life. She was uncovering it, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it hidden. The night everything began to unravel didn't feel unusual at first. That's the strange thing about life, how the most important moments often arrive dressed as ordinary ones. It was a Friday evening, and Ethan had called earlier that week to say they were coming over for dinner. I spent the entire afternoon preparing just like I always did. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with garlic, the same meals Ethan used to love when he was younger. Some habits never leave you. I even took out my good plates, the ones I only used for special occasions. Not because Lauren appreciated them, she once called them a bit dated, but because I needed to remind myself that some things still mattered, that I still mattered. They arrived just after 6. Lauren stepped in first as usual, carrying a bottle of wine I knew I wouldn't drink. She kissed the air near my cheek and smiled. "Smells wonderful, Jenna," she said. Ethan followed behind her, giving me a quick hug. "Hey, Mom." There was warmth in his voice, but it felt thinner than it used to. We sat down to eat, and for a while, everything seemed normal. Lauren talked about some new campaign she was leading. Ethan chimed in occasionally, proud of her, or maybe just trying to keep the conversation flowing. I listened, nodding, smiling when appropriate, but I could feel it, that undercurrent, like something waiting just beneath the surface. Halfway through dinner, Lauren set her fork down and glanced toward the living room, toward the sewing box. "I've been thinking," she said casually. My stomach thinking, she said casually. My stomach tightened. "About what Ethan asked. About this house," she replied. "It has so much potential. It just needs updating." I forced a polite smile. "I'm comfortable with it the way it is." Tightened. "About what Ethan asked." "About this house," she replied. "It has so much potential. It just needs updating." I forced a polite smile. "I'm comfortable with it the way it is." She nodded slowly. "Of course, but comfort and improvement aren't mutually exclusive." Ethan shifted in his seat. "Lauren?" "No, I mean it in a good way," she continued, waving a hand lightly. "A fresh coat of paint, new furniture, maybe decluttering some of the older items." Her eyes flicked back toward the living room again. I set my fork down. "I like my things," I said quietly. "And that's fine," she replied quickly. "But sometimes we hold on to things that don't serve us anymore." There it was again. That word, things. As if everything in my home, every memory, Every piece of my life was just an object waiting to be replaced. Ethan cleared his throat. Let's just eat, okay? Lauren smiled at him, softening her tone. Of course. For a moment, the tension eased, but not completely. Because I knew she wasn't done. After dinner, we moved into the living room. Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Lauren stood near the coffee table, glancing around like she was still assessing the space. And then slowly, deliberately, she walked over to the sewing box. I felt my entire body tense. Lauren, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She paused, her hand hovering just above the lid. What? She asked, turning to me with an innocent expression. Please don't touch that. Ethan looked up, surprised. Mom, it's just a box. Just a box. The words hit like a slap. No, I said firmly. It's not. Lauren tilted her head, studying me. That's interesting, she said softly. What is Ethan asked? The way she reacts, Lauren replied, her eyes still locked on mine. It's not about the box, Ethan. It's about what's inside it. My heart began to pound. You're overthinking, I said quickly. Am I? She asked. Before I could stop her, she reached down and lifted the lid. The creak of the hinges sounded louder than it ever had before. Lauren. I stood up so abruptly, my chair scraped against the floor. She froze, her hand still on the lid. The room went silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, she closed it again. I'm sorry, she said, though there was no real apology in her voice. I didn't realize it was that serious. Ethan frowned. Mom, what's going on? Why are you acting like this? I couldn't answer, because I didn't have an answer that wouldn't destroy everything. It's just old, I said finally. It's fragile. Lauren let out a small, almost amused breath. Old things can still hold value, she said. But sometimes they hold secrets too. My chest tightened. Lauren, Ethan warned. But she didn't stop. I mean, think about it. She continued, pacing slowly now. You've had this box for decades, right? And you won't let anyone near it. That's not normal. It's personal, I snapped. Exactly, she said, pointing at me. Personal, which means there's something in there you don't want anyone to see. Ethan stood up. Okay, that's enough. But Lauren turned to him, her expression serious now. Don't you find it strange, she asked, the way she reacted just now? He hesitated. That hesitation, it broke something inside me. It's not strange, I said, my voice trembling. It's mine. That should be enough. Lauren softened her tone again, but her words were sharper than ever. Of course it is, she said. I just think maybe it's time to let go of whatever you're holding on to. I shook my head. You don't understand. No, she agreed quietly. I don't. And that's exactly the problem. The room fell into a heavy silence. Ethan looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. Can we just drop this? He said. Lauren nodded, stepping back from the sewing box. Fine, she said lightly. We'll drop it. But I knew she didn't mean it, because the way she looked at that box one last time before sitting down again. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was determination. She wasn't going to let this go, not until she knew what was inside. And as I sat there, trying to steady my breathing, I realized something I had been avoiding for far too long. This secret, the one I had buried for decades, was no longer safe. Because Lauren wasn't just asking questions anymore. She was digging. And sooner or later, she was going to find something I could never take back. There are some memories you don't revisit because they hurt, and then there are the ones you avoid because they might destroy everything if you let them surface. That night, after Ethan and Lauren left, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't clean the dishes right away like I usually did. I just sat there in my armchair, staring at the sewing box, feeling something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. The past. It crept in slowly at first like a draft through a cracked window. And then, all at once, it was everywhere. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I wasn't in my living room anymore. I was 23 years old again, alone, terrified, and lying in a hospital bed that smelled faintly of antiseptic and something colder, something emptier. It was late November. I remember that clearly because snow had started falling that night, coating the streets of Cleveland in a quiet, heavy silence. I had taken a bus to the hospital by myself, gripping my coat tightly around my swollen belly, trying not to cry in front of strangers. Robert wasn't there. He had left weeks before. No explanation that made sense. Just promises that faded into excuses and then nothing at all. By the time the contractions started, I already knew I would be doing this alone. The hospital wasn't the kind you see in movies. It was small, underfunded, and tired. The paint on the walls was chipped in places and the nurses moved quickly, not out of indifference, but because there were too many patients and not enough hands. I remember one nurse in particular. Her name was Carol, I think. Or maybe Claire. It's strange how some details stay sharp while others blur into nothing. She had kind eyes, but she looked exhausted, like she had seen too much in one lifetime. "You're doing fine," she kept telling me. I didn't feel fine. I felt like my world was cracking open. Hours passed in a haze of pain and fear. I don't remember everything, just fragments. The bright overhead lights, the cold metal railings, the sound of my own voice crying out in ways I didn't recognize. And then silence. A baby's cry. For a moment, everything else disappeared. "That's your son," someone said. My son. They placed him in my arms, and I remember staring down at him, trying to understand how something so small could feel so overwhelming. He was wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, his face red, and scrunched, his tiny fingers curling and uncurling, like he was reaching for something. For me. I should have felt nothing but love. And I did. But there was something else, too. Something I couldn't explain at the time. A hesitation. A flicker of doubt that passed so quickly. I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. But it was. Because even in that moment, something didn't feel right. I pushed the thought away. Of course I did. What kind of mother questions her own child the moment he's born? The next morning, everything felt quieter. Too quiet. They had moved me to a recovery room, one with a small window overlooking the parking lot. Snow had piled up overnight, covering everything in a thick white layer. The world looked clean, untouched. But inside that room, something had shifted. A nurse came in carrying my baby. Not the same one from the night before. At least I didn't think so. I remember sitting up slowly, my heart beginning to race. "Here you go," she said, placing the baby in my arms. I looked down. He was still small, still wrapped in that same thin blanket. But something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Babies all look similar, I told myself. That's what people always say. But as I studied his face, that unease returned. Stronger this time. His features, they weren't quite what I remembered. "Is everything okay?" the nurse asked. I forced a smile. Yes, of course. But my hands were trembling. Later that day, I overheard something. Two nurses talking quietly in the hallway. "Room mix-up last night. Labels got switched. Just fix it before discharge." My heart dropped. I sat there frozen, my baby sleeping in my arms, those words echoing over and over in my mind. Room mix-up. Labels switched. I wanted to stand up, to walk out into that hallway and demand answers. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't, because in that moment I looked down at the baby in my arms, and he stirred slightly, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, and I felt it. That connection, that overwhelming, undeniable pull. Mine. What if I was wrong? What if I made a scene and they took him away? What if I ended up with nothing, no husband, no family, no child? I told myself it was just confusion, just exhaustion, that the nurses knew what they were doing, that everything was fine, so I stayed silent. I signed the discharge papers, and I went home with the baby they gave me. Ethan. I raised him with everything I had, every sleepless night, every scraped knee, every birthday cake and school play I was there. I loved him in ways I didn't even know were possible. And yet, that memory never fully left me. It stayed buried, tucked away in the deepest part of my mind, where I could pretend it didn't exist. Except for one thing, the envelope. A few weeks after I got home, a letter arrived from the hospital. Inside was a corrected birth record, an administrative adjustment they called it. But the name on that paper, it wasn't Ethan's. It was another child's. A name I had never heard before. I remember sitting at the kitchen table staring at that paper, my hands shaking. That was the moment I knew. Something had happened that night, something they didn't want to fully admit, and I had chosen not to ask, not to fight, not to risk losing the child I had already come to love. So I folded that paper carefully, placed it inside an envelope, and hid it in the only place I knew it would never be found. My sewing box. For 40 years, it stayed there, in box. For 40 years, it stayed there, untouched, unspoken, until now. And as I opened my eyes, back in my quiet living room, staring at that same box across the room, I realized something that made my breath catch. Lauren wasn't wrong. There was something inside it, something I had spent a lifetime trying to forget. And if it ever came to light, it wouldn't just change the past, it would destroy the present. The next morning, everything felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter what little stability I still had left. I woke up earlier than usual, long before the sun had fully risen. The house was quiet, wrapped in that familiar stillness I used to find comforting. But now it only made my thoughts louder. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the sewing box across the room. It looked the same as it always had, worn, unassuming, silent. But now, it felt like a ticking clock. Lauren had seen too much. Not what was inside, but how I reacted. And that alone had been enough to plant something dangerous in her mind. Doubt, curiosity, suspicion. And people like Lauren, they didn't let things go. By mid-morning, my phone rang. I didn't even have to check the caller ID. "Hello?" I answered, already bracing myself. "Hi, Jenna." Lauren's voice came through bright and polite. Too polite. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No," I said. "I've been up." "Oh, good," she replied. "I was actually thinking about yesterday." "Of course you were. It got a little tense," she continued. "And I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I overstepped." Her tone was smooth, carefully measured. but something about it didn't feel right. I appreciate that, I said cautiously. There was a brief pause. And then, I was wondering if I could come by today, she added. Just you and me. I thought maybe we could talk clear the air. My grip tightened around the phone. Every instinct in my body told me to say no. But another voice quieter, weaker whispered something else. If I refused, she would only grow more suspicious. All right, I said finally. You can come by. Perfect, she said quickly. I'll be there around noon. The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone in my hand. This wasn't an apology. It was an approach. By the time she arrived, I had already convinced myself I was overreacting. That maybe, just maybe, she really did want to make peace. She knocked lightly before letting herself in, like she had done 100 times before. Jenna! She called out. I'm in the kitchen, I replied. She walked in dressed neatly as always, her hair pulled back, her expression calm. Too calm. I brought coffee, she said, holding up a small carrier. That's kind of you, I replied. We sat across from each other, I replied. We sat across from each other at the table, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she smiled. I really am sorry about yesterday, she began. I didn't mean to upset you. I nodded slowly. It's fine. At the table, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she smiled. I really am sorry about yesterday, she began. I didn't mean to upset you. I nodded slowly. It's fine. But it's not just about that, she continued. I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot from the beginning. I raised an eyebrow slightly. I've always wanted us to have a good relationship, she said. You're Ethan's mother. That matters to me. Her words sounded right, but her eyes, they were searching, measuring. I want that too, I said carefully. She leaned forward, slightly lowering her voice. Then maybe we should be honest with each other. There it was. My chest tightened. I am being honest, I said. Are you? She asked gently. I didn't respond. She let the silence stretch, then stood up slowly, walking toward the living room, toward the sewing box. I followed her, my heart pounding harder with each step. She stopped beside it, looking down at the worn lid. You know, she said quietly, when people react the way you did yesterday, it's usually not about the object itself. It is to me, I said quickly. She shook her head. No, she said. It's about what the object represents. I swallowed. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, she said, turning to face me. Help me understand. I don't have to explain myself. I snapped. No, she agreed calmly. You don't. But if you don't, I'm going to start asking questions. The words landed heavier than anything she had said before. What kind of questions, I asked, my voice barely steady. She held my gaze. The kind that don't stop at this house, she said. The kind that involve records, hospitals, dates. My breath caught. She stepped closer. I work in marketing. Jenna, she continued. But that doesn't mean I don't know how to dig when something doesn't add up. I felt the room spin slightly. You're overstepping, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Am I? She asked softly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're hiding something. I'm not hiding anything. Then let me see the box. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. We stood there in silence, staring at each other. And then, unexpectedly, she sighed. I didn't want to do this like this, she said. Do what? She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. My heart dropped. "What is that?" I asked. "Just something I found," she replied, placing it on the table. I didn't move. She opened the folder, slowly sliding a piece of paper toward me. "Do you recognize this hospital?" she asked. I glanced down. Cleveland General Hospital. My hands began to tremble. "I did a little research," she continued. "Nothing invasive, just public records. Birth logs, staff reports, that kind of thing." I couldn't breathe. "There was an incident," she said, "about 40 years ago. A mix-up in the maternity ward. 2 babies." My vision blurred. "They never fully disclosed it," she added. "But there were internal notes, corrections, adjustments." I looked up at her, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" She hesitated. For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not cruelty, not judgment, something closer to determination. "Because I need to know who I married into," she said, "and because Ethan deserves the truth." The truth. The word echoed in my mind louder than anything else. "I'm not going to hurt him," she added quickly, "but I'm not going to ignore this either." I shook my head, backing away slightly. "You don't understand what you're messing with." "Then help me understand," she said again. I looked at the sewing box, at the one place that held everything I had tried to forget. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. Lauren wasn't guessing anymore. She was getting close. Too close. And if I didn't do something soon, she wasn't just going to find the truth. She was going to drag it into the light. Whether I was ready or not. After Lauren left that afternoon, I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there in the living room, staring at the sewing box like it had betrayed me. For 40 years, it had been my silent companion, my safe place. The one thing that held my secret without question, without judgment. And now it felt exposed, vulnerable, like it was no longer mine to protect. I walked over slowly and placed my hand on the lid, pressing down as if I could somehow keep the past from escaping. "She knows," I whispered. "Not everything, not yet, but enough." That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. It all blended into a restless rhythm that kept me wide awake. I kept replaying Lauren's words in my mind. Hospitals, records, dates. She wasn't bluffing. She had already started digging, and if she kept going, she wouldn't need the box anymore. By the next morning, a decision had settled in my chest. Heavy, unavoidable. I had to move it. The box. I couldn't leave it sitting out in the open like that anymore, like an invitation for disaster. So I waited until the afternoon when I knew no one would be coming by, and I carefully picked it up for the first time in years. It felt heavier than I remembered. Or maybe that was just the weight of what it held. I carried it into my bedroom, opened the closet, and reached for the top shelf, the one place no one ever bothered to look. For a moment, I hesitated, because moving it felt like admitting something had changed, like I was no longer in control. But I pushed that thought aside and placed it carefully on the shelf, sliding it behind a stack of old blankets. Out of sight, out of reach. Or at least I hoped so. For the rest of the day, I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the kitchen, sorted through old magazines, even sat down to sew for a while. But my hands weren't steady. My stitches came out uneven. My mind kept drifting back to one question. What if she goes further? 2 days passed without hearing from Lauren. That alone made me uneasy, because silence with someone like her didn't mean surrender. It meant preparation. On the third day, Ethan called. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice sounded off. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Everything okay?" There was a pause. "Lauren mentioned she stopped by the other day," he said. "Of course she did." "Yes," I said. "We talked about what I swallowed, just things." Another pause. "She said you got upset," he continued, "about the sewing box." There it was again. That box. It had become the center of everything. "I didn't get upset," I said. "I just didn't want her going through my things." "That's fair," he admitted, "but she thinks there's something more to it." I closed my eyes. "What does she think?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "I don't know exactly," he said, "but she's been looking into some stuff." My heart started racing again. "What kind of stuff, Mom?" He sighed. "Is there something you want to tell me?" The question hung in the air between us. This was it, the moment I had avoided for decades, and I still couldn't say it. "No," I said. The word felt like a lie the second it left my mouth. Ethan didn't respond right away. "Okay," he said finally, "if you say so." But his voice had changed. Doubt had crept in. Just like Lauren wanted. We hung up shortly after that, and I sat there in silence, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just about Lauren anymore. It was about Ethan, about the way he looked at me, the way he was starting to question things he had never questioned before. And that scared me more than anything else. That evening, I went into my bedroom and stared at the closet, at the place where I had hidden the box. For a moment, I considered taking it somewhere else, maybe even getting rid of it entirely. But I couldn't. Because that box wasn't just a secret. It was the only proof I had left, the only link to a truth I had buried. And deep down, I wasn't ready to let it go. The next morning, I left the house for a few hours to run errands. Nothing unusual, just groceries, a stop at the pharmacy, a quick visit to the bank. I needed the normalcy, the illusion that life was still under control. But when I pulled back into my driveway, something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it at first. The house looked the same. The front door was closed. The curtains were still drawn. But as I stepped inside, that feeling grew stronger. The air felt disturbed, like someone had been there. I set my bag down slowly, my heart beginning to pound. "Hello," I called out. No answer. I walked into the living room. Everything was in place. Nothing seemed out of order. But then I noticed something small, something most people wouldn't have caught. The chair near the window, my chair, had been moved slightly, just a few inches. Enough for me to know. Someone had been inside. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I turned and walked quickly down the hallway toward my bedroom. Each step felt heavier than the last. My hand trembled as I reached for the closet door. "No," I whispered under my breath. "No, no," I pulled it open. The blankets were still there, but they had been shifted, and behind them, empty space. The sewing box was gone. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even move. Because there was only one person who would have known exactly where to look. Only one person who would have been bold enough to come into my home, into my private space, and take it. Lauren. And as the realization settled in sharp and undeniable, a new kind of fear took hold. Not the quiet, buried fear I had carried for years, but something louder, more immediate, because now the secret wasn't hidden anymore. It was in her hands, and if she opened that box, there would be no going back. I don't remember grabbing my car keys. I don't remember locking the front door. All I remember is the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I drove, because there was only one place she would be, Lauren's house. The drive felt longer than it ever had before, every red light stretching into eternity, every passing car, an obstacle between me and the truth I was desperate and terrified to stop. What would I even say when I got there? Give it back. Don't open it. Pretend none of this was real. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. It was already too late for that. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. Ethan's car was there. So was Lauren's. They were both home. That made it worse. I stepped out of the car, barely feeling the ground beneath my feet as I walked up to the front door. I didn't knock. I opened it. "Lauren!" I called out, my voice louder than I intended. Silence, then footsteps. Ethan appeared first, his expression confused, and then immediately concerned when he saw my face. "Mom, what's wrong? Where is she?" I demanded. He blinked. "Lauren, she's upstairs." I didn't wait for him to finish. I moved past him, my heart racing, heading straight for the stairs, like I already knew what I was going to find. "Mom, wait, what's going on?" Ethan called after me, following close behind. I reached the top of the stairs and saw the bedroom door slightly open. And inside, Lauren, standing near the bed, with my sewing box in her hands. For a moment, everything froze. Time, sound, even my breath. "Put it down," I said, my voice shaking. She looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "I was wondering how long it would take you," she said. Ethan stepped into the doorway behind me, confusion turning into alarm. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. Lauren didn't answer him. Her eyes stayed on me. "You should have told him," she said quietly. My chest tightened. "You had no right," I whispered. "No right," she repeated, her voice calm but sharp. "You brought me into this family. You married me to your son. I think that he gives me every right to know the truth." "No right," she repeated, her voice calm but sharp. "You brought me into this family. You married me to your son. I think that gives me every right to know the truth." Ethan looked between us, his voice rising. "What truth? What are you talking about?" I stepped forward. "Lauren, please, give me the box." She didn't move. Instead, she slowly placed it on the bed, and then she opened it. The creak of the hinges cut through the room like a blade. "Stop!" I lunged forward, but Ethan grabbed my arm. "Mom, wait," he said. "Just tell me what's going on." But I couldn't. Not anymore. Because Lauren was already reaching inside. She moved things aside, spools of thread, old photographs, tiny scraps of fabric, until her fingers found it. The envelope. The one I had hidden for decades. The one that held everything. She pulled it out slowly, holding it between her fingers like it weighed nothing. But I knew better. It weighed everything. "What is that?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. Lauren didn't answer. She opened the envelope and pulled out the paper inside. The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy. permanent. She scanned the document, her eyes moving quickly at first and then slowing, stopping. Her expression changed. Not to shock, not entirely, more like confirmation. "I knew it," she whispered. My knees felt weak. Ethan stepped closer. "What is it?" She looked up at him, and for the first time since I had known her, there was no control in her voice. "It's a birth certificate," she said. Ethan frowned. "So what?" Lauren swallowed. "It's not yours." The words landed like a thunderclap. Ethan froze. What he said barely audible. Lauren turned the paper toward him. "Look at the name," she said. "Look at the date. Look at the hospital." He took the paper slowly, his hands beginning to shake. I watched his face as he read. Confusion. Disbelief. And then, "Something breaking. This doesn't make sense," he said. "Mom, I couldn't look at him. I couldn't breathe." Jenna Lauren said softly but firmly. "Tell him." I shook my head. "Tell me what?" And then something breaking. This doesn't make sense," he said. "Mom, I couldn't look at him. I couldn't breathe." Jenna Lauren said softly but firmly. "Tell him." I shook my head. "Tell me what Ethan demanded," his voice rising. Still, I said nothing, because once I spoke the truth, there would be no undoing it. "Mom!" he shouted. I flinched. That sound, his voice filled with anger and fear. It cut deeper than anything Lauren had done. "It's just paperwork," I said weakly. "It doesn't mean anything. Don't lie to him," Lauren snapped. Ethan turned to her. "What is she talking about?" Lauren hesitated for just a moment, and then she said it. "There was a mix-up at the hospital," she said. "The night you were born." The room seemed to tilt. Ethan stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up. "What kind of mix-up?" She looked at me, waiting for me to finish it. I closed my eyes. For 40 years, I had carried this truth alone, protected it, buried it, and now it was being dragged into the light. "You might not be her biological son," Lauren said quietly. Ethan's face went pale. "No," he said immediately. "That's not no. That's not possible." He turned to me, desperation in his eyes. "Mom!" I opened my mouth, and for the first time in decades, I didn't lie. There was confusion. I said, my voice barely holding together. "At the hospital." "That's not an answer," he snapped. I didn't know for sure. I continued, tears blurring my vision. I thought maybe I was wrong. "But you kept it," he said, holding up the paper. "You kept this. I didn't want to lose you," I whispered. The words hung in the air, raw, ugly, honest. Ethan stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. And now he asked. I had no answer, because now everything was falling apart. Lauren stepped back slightly, watching us both. She had what she wanted. The truth was out, but the damage had only just begun. And as Ethan stood there, holding that piece of paper that changed everything, she had what she wanted. The truth was out. But the damage had only just begun. And as Ethan stood there, holding that piece of paper that changed everything, I realized something that made my heart ache in a way I didn't know was still possible. I wasn't just losing a secret. I might be losing my son. Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there, holding that paper, like it might disappear if he let go. And I stood across from him, unable to move, unable to breathe. watching the moment I had feared for 40 years unfold right in front of me. Lauren stepped back, almost like she understood this part didn't belong to her anymore. This was between me and my son. "Say something," Ethan finally whispered. His voice wasn't angry this time. It was worse. It was broken. My throat tightened. I didn't know for sure. He let out a sharp, disbelieving breath. "You didn't know," he repeated. "Mom, you kept a document that says I might not even be your child. And you're telling me you didn't know I was scared?" I said, the words spilling out faster now. "I was alone, Ethan. Your father had left. I had no one. And when I held you, I couldn't. So you just decided he cut in. You just decided I was yours and ignored everything else?" Tears blurred my vision. "I chose you," I whispered. "That's not the same thing," he snapped. The force of his voice made me flinch. "I needed you," I said, my voice trembling. "And I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I heard wrong. Maybe that paper didn't mean what I thought it did, but you never checked," he said, shaking his head. "You never asked. You never told me." "No," I admitted. The word felt like a confession. A failure. He looked at me like I was someone else entirely. "I've spent my whole life thinking I knew who I was," he said, "thinking I knew where I came from." "You do," I said quickly. "You're my son." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Am I?" he asked. The question hit harder than anything else, because I didn't have a simple answer anymore. Lauren shifted slightly behind him, her arms crossed, now watching. Waiting. Always waiting. Ethan turned back to her. "How long did you know?" he asked. "I didn't," she said calmly. "Not for sure. I just followed the signs." "What signs?" he demanded. She hesitated for a moment. "Your features," she said. "Your medical history. The way things didn't quite line up." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked at me briefly before continuing. "You told me your father had heart problems," she said. "Genetic ones. But you don't show any markers. And then there's your blood type. It doesn't match what it should be based on what your mom told us." My stomach dropped. "You had no right to look into that," I said sharply. "I had every right," she replied, her tone firm. "I'm his wife, and I'm his mother," I shot back. The words hung in the air, heavy, with everything they no longer guaranteed. Ethan rubbed his face, pacing slightly now. Okay, he muttered. "Let's just think about this." But there was no thinking anymore. Only feeling, and everything hurt. "So what now?" he asked, finally looking at me again. What am I supposed to do with this? I didn't have an answer, because I had never let myself think that far. "I never wanted this to happen," I said softly. "But it did," he replied. Lauren stepped forward, then her voice calmer than before. "There's a way to find out the truth," she said. We both looked at her. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "A DNA test," she said simply. Asked. "A DNA test," she said simply. The words hit like a final blow. "No," I said immediately. Ethan turned to me, his expression hardening. "Why not?" "Because I stopped struggling to find the words, because it doesn't change anything that matters." The words hit like a final blow. "No," I said immediately. Ethan turned to me, his expression hardening. "Why not?" "Because I stopped struggling to find the words, because it doesn't change anything that matters. It changes everything," he said. "It doesn't change how I raised you." I insisted. It doesn't change the life we had, but it changes who I am. He shot back. Silence filled the room again. And this time, it felt final. Lauren spoke again, more gently now. It doesn't have to destroy anything, she said. It just gives us answers. Answers. As if answers were simple, as if they didn't come with consequences. Ethan looked at the paper in his hands again, then back at me. I need to know, he said. My heart broke a little more. Ethan, I need to know, he repeated. There was no anger in his voice anymore, just resolve. And that scared me more than anything else. Because anger can pass. Because anger can pass. But resolve that stays. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my strength finally giving out. If you do this, I said quietly, you might find something you can't unsee. He nodded. I already have resolve that stays. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my strength finally giving out. If you do this, I said quietly, you might find something you can't unsee. He nodded. I already have, he replied. The truth of that hit me like a wave. He was right. There was no going back to before. Not for any of us. Lauren placed a hand lightly on his arm. We'll do it together, she said. He didn't pull away. And that more than anything made me feel like I was already losing him. Fine, I whispered. They both looked at me. If that's what you need, I continued, my voice barely holding together. Then do it. Ethan studied my face for a long moment. Why does it sound like you're giving up? He asked. I shook my head. I'm not giving up, I said. I'm just accepting that I can't protect you from this anymore. His expression softened just slightly. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough anymore. Lauren nodded once, satisfied. I'll arrange it, she said. Of course she would. She always did. As they stood there talking about logistics, appointments, timelines, results, I felt myself drifting. Like I was no longer part of the conversation. No longer part of the future they were planning. I had spent decades holding on to a secret, believing I was protecting my son. Believing I was preserving something sacred. But now sitting there in that room watching him slip further away with every passing second, I couldn't help but wonder. Had I been protecting him, or had I been protecting myself? And was that choice finally catching up with me? The days after that felt like living in someone else's life. Everything looked the same. The same streets, the same house, the same quiet afternoons. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Because the one thing that had always grounded me was gone. Ethan. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, I could feel him slipping further away with every passing hour. He didn't call. He didn't come by. And when I tried reaching out, the conversations were short. Careful. Distant. Polite. That hurt more than anger ever could, because politeness meant he was holding something back. And I knew exactly what it was. The test was scheduled for the following week. Lauren handled everything, of course. She texted me the details like it was just another appointment, like we were discussing something routine. Thursday, 10 a.m., LabCorp on Maple Street. No warmth, no hesitation, just facts. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Okay, that was all I could manage. The night before the test, I barely slept. I kept thinking about every moment of Ethan's life, his first steps, his first day of school, the time he broke his arm, falling out of that old oak tree in the backyard. I had been their tree in the backyard. I had been there for all of it. Every scraped knee, every late night fever, every heartbreak. I was his mother. No piece of paper, no test could change that. But deep down, a quieter voice whispered something I didn't want to admit. What if it does? The next morning, I arrived early. The building was sterile and cold, all white walls and fluorescent lights. It smelled faintly of disinfectant, just like the hospital had all those years ago. That alone made my stomach turn. Lauren was already there. Of course she was, standing near the reception desk, perfectly composed, scrolling through her phone like this was just another item on her schedule. Ethan stood beside her. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like something inside him had been stretched too thin. When he saw me, he hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Mom." "Ethan," I replied softly. Lauren looked up and gave me a brief, polite smile. "Jenna." No one hugged. No one reached out. We were 3 people standing in the same space, but we felt like strangers. The nurse called us back a few minutes later. "Just a simple cheek swab," she explained. "It'll only take a minute. Simple." Such a small word for something that could change everything. Ethan went first. I watched as he sat in the chair, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some point across the room. The nurse swabbed the inside of his cheek, sealed the sample, and labeled it. Then it was my turn. As I sat down, my hands trembled slightly. "You okay?" the nurse asked gently. I forced a smile. "Yes, but I wasn't, not even close." Because as that swab touched my skin, all I could think about was that night in the hospital. The confusion, the silence, the choice I had made. And now here I was, 40 years later, finally facing the consequences. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. And then it was over. "Results should be ready in about a week," the nurse said. A week. 7 days. It felt like a lifetime. We walked out together, but not really together. Lauren spoke first. "I'll let you know when the results come in," she said. Ethan nodded. I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Over the next few days, time moved differently, slower, heavier. Every moment felt stretched, like I was waiting for something I couldn't stop. I tried to keep busy, cleaning, cooking, even sewing, but nothing held my attention for long. My mind kept drifting back to the same question. What if he's not mine, and right behind it another one? What if he is? Because either way, something would break. On the 5th day, Ethan finally came by, unexpected, unannounced. I opened the door, and for a brief moment, my heart lifted. But the look on his face brought it crashing back down. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I said quickly, stepping aside. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure he belonged there anymore. That alone nearly broke me. We sat in the living room, the same room where everything had started, where Lauren had first opened the box, where the truth had begun to surface. "I've been thinking," he said. I nodded, waiting. "If the test comes back." He hesitated. "If it says you're not my biological mother," the words hung in the air. I swallowed hard. "Then what?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who used to run into my arms without hesitation. "I don't know," he admitted. The honesty in that hurt, but it also meant something. He wasn't pushing me away completely. Not yet. "I don't want to lose you," he added. My eyes filled with tears. "You won't," I said immediately. "You'll never lose me. But things will change," he said. I couldn't argue with that. because they already had. I just need to know who I am, he continued. I nodded slowly. I understand. And I did. Even if it meant losing the version of him that had always been mine. He stood up after a while, walking toward the door. Lauren will call when the results are in, he said. I nodded again. Okay. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Then he turned back. Whatever happens, he said, his voice softer now, you're still the one who raised me. My heart ached. That means everything I whispered. He gave a small nod. Then he left. And just like that, I was alone again, waiting for the truth. For the moment that would either confirm everything I had believed for 40 years or take it all away. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I knew it would be Lauren before I even picked up. Somehow, I could feel it. The moment had arrived. Jenna? Her voice came through steady but quieter than usual. The results are in. My hand tightened around the phone. For a second, I couldn't speak. Okay, I said finally, though my voice didn't sound like my own. We're at home, she continued. You should come. Not can you come. Not would you like to come. You should. Like this was something that required witnesses. Like this was a moment that had to be shared. I'll be there, I said. The drive felt different this time. Slower. Heavier. Like I wasn't rushing toward something, but being pulled toward it. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, but inside, everything was trembling. 40 years. 40 years of silence. 40 years of love, of memories, of raising a child I believed was mine. And now, everything was about to be reduced to a single result on a piece of paper. I parked in their driveway and sat there for a moment, just breathing, trying to prepare myself. But how do you prepare for something like this? You don't. You just walk in and hope you don't fall apart. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside slowly. Ethan was standing in the living room. Lauren sat on the couch, a sealed envelope in her hands. The same kind of envelope I had hidden all those years ago. The symmetry of it made my chest ache. Hi, Ethan said. His voice was calm. Too calm. Hi, I replied. No one moved closer. No one hugged. Lauren stood up, holding the envelope carefully. They explained everything she said. The results are clear. Of course they were. Science didn't hesitate. Science didn't doubt. Science didn't carry emotions. Do you want to open it? She asked Ethan. He hesitated, then shook his head. No, he said. You read it. Lauren nodded. She opened the envelope slowly, pulling out the document inside. I watched her eyes move across the page and then stop. Her expression changed. Not shock, not confusion. Something else, something heavier. Ethan noticed it too. What he asked, his voice tightening. Lauren looked up. At him, then at me, and for the first time since all of this began, she didn't look certain. What does it say? Ethan pressed. She swallowed. It says... She paused, like she needed a second to process it herself. There is no biological match. The room went silent. My heart dropped. Even though I had prepared myself for this, hearing it out loud felt like something inside me had been torn open. Ethan didn't react right away. He just stood there staring at her. No match, he repeated. Lauren nodded slowly. You are not biologically related. The words landed heavily between us. Final. Irreversible. Ethan let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. But I could see it in his eyes. Nothing was okay. I stepped forward slightly. Ethan. He held up a hand, not angrily, just needing space. I need a second, he said. I stopped, because I understood. He walked a few steps away, pacing slowly. This means, he muttered. This means my whole life. Everything I thought I knew, his voice trailed off. Lauren watched him carefully, but she didn't interrupt. For once, she stayed quiet. I stood there, feeling the weight of everything I had done pressing down on me. This was the moment I had tried to avoid. The truth. Unfiltered. Unavoidable. And it hurt more than I had imagined. Ethan turned back to me. So, it's true, he said. I nodded slowly, tears already falling. Yes. He looked at me for a long moment, and then asked the question I had feared the most. Why didn't you tell me? My chest tightened. I was afraid, I said honestly. Afraid of what? He asked. Of losing you? I whispered. His expression shifted. Not anger, not entirely, something deeper. You think this doesn't make me feel lost anyway, he said. I had no answer. Because he was right. I spent my whole life believing something that might not even be real. He continued. And you knew there was a chance it wasn't. I didn't know for sure. I said, my voice breaking. I hoped I convinced myself. But you kept the proof, he said, gesturing toward the paper. I closed my eyes. I couldn't throw it away. I admitted. It was the only thing that connected me to the truth, even if I didn't want to face it. Lauren finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. There's more, she said. Both Ethan and I turned to her. What do you mean? He asked. She looked down at the paper again. The test confirms there's no biological match between you and Jenna, she said, but it also identifies potential genetic markers. My heart skipped. What markers? Ethan asked. Lauren hesitated. It suggests there's a strong probability your biological family is still traceable, she said. Close matches in the database. The air in the room shifted. This wasn't just about what he lost. It was about what he might find. Ethan looked at her, then back at me. You're saying my real family could still be out there? The word real hit me like a knife, but I didn't correct him, because in this moment, I didn't have the right. Lauren nodded. It's possible. Silence filled the room again. But this silence felt different. Not just heavy, directional. Like everything was about to move forward, whether I was ready or not. Ethan exhaled slowly. I need to think, he said, and I knew what that meant. He wasn't just processing the truth. He was deciding what to do with it, and whether I still had a place in his life after it. I stood there feeling smaller than I ever had before, because for the first time, I wasn't the one holding the secret. I wasn't the one in control. I was just the woman who had kept the truth hidden. And now, I had to live with what that truth might cost me. After that day, everything changed in a way I couldn't fix. Not with words, not with time, not even with love. Because the truth had done what it always does. It created a crack that couldn't be unseen. Ethan didn't come by for almost a week. Not a call. Not a message. And I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. What do you say to the child you raised when you're no longer sure what you are to him? A mother, a stranger, something in between. The silence stretched longer than I expected, and it wasn't peaceful. It was loud. Every corner of the house reminded me of him. The framed photos on the wall, the old baseball glove still sitting in the hallway closet, even the faint scratch marks on the kitchen table from when he used to do homework there as a boy. Every memory felt like a question now. On the 7th day, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart jumped as I walked toward it, a strange mix of hope and fear building inside me. When I opened it, it wasn't Ethan. It was Lauren. Alone. For a second, I just stared at her. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was different, softer, less controlled. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, glancing around the house like she was seeing it differently now, like she understood something she hadn't before. We sat in the living room, the same place where everything had started, the same place where she had first pushed too far. And now she looked like she didn't quite know how to begin. "Ethan's not here," she said. "I figured," I replied quietly. She nodded. "He's been processing." I swallowed. "How is he?" She hesitated, confused, and now she looked like she didn't quite know how to begin. "Ethan's not here," she said. "I figured," I replied quietly. She nodded. "He's been processing." I swallowed. "How is he?" She hesitated, confused, she said. Angry, lost. Each word landed like a weight. "And you?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "I thought I was helping," she admitted. There was something honest in her tone, something I hadn't heard before. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she continued. "Finding the truth, clearing things up." I didn't respond. Because part of me I didn't respond. Because part of me wanted to say she had no right. But another part knew she had done what I never could. I didn't think about what it would feel like, she added quietly. For either of you. Wanted to say she had no right. But another part knew she had done what I never could. I didn't think about what it would feel like, she added quietly. For either of you. Silence settled between us, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a battle. It felt like something else. Regret. "I spent days being angry at you," I said finally. She looked up, and now she asked. I sighed. "Now I'm just sad." Her expression softened. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "I know," I replied, and surprisingly I did. That didn't erase what she had done, but it changed something. Because for the first time, I didn't see her as the enemy. I saw her as someone who had walked into a situation she didn't fully understand. Just like I had all those years ago. "There's something else," she said after a moment. My chest tightened slightly. "What is it?" She reached into her bag and pulled out another envelope. Smaller this time. More worn. "We followed up on the DNA results," she said. "The lab provided potential family matches." My breath caught. This was it. The next step. The part I had been avoiding even thinking about. She handed the envelope to me. "I think you should see this," she said. I stared at it. My hands didn't move. Because I already knew what it meant. If Ethan had a biological family out there, then somewhere there was another child. The one I had lost. or never had. Have you told him I asked? She shook her head. No, she said. I wanted to talk to you first. That surprised me. Why I asked? She hesitated. Because this affects you too, she said. For the first time since all of this began, she was considering me. Not as an obstacle, not as someone hiding something, but as part of the story. I took the envelope slowly. It felt heavier than it should have. Inside were a few pages, names, locations, connections. One of them stood out immediately. A woman, late 30s, living in Ohio. My heart started racing. Ohio, the same state where Ethan had been born, where everything had started. I couldn't finish the sentence. A close genetic match, Lauren said. Possibly a sibling. My hands trembled. A sibling? That meant the other child had lived, had grown up, had a life. Without me. Without knowing. And now, they might be just a few hours away. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Lauren nodded. I don't think there's a right answer, she said. We sat there in silence again, but this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not tense, just real. Ethan wants to meet them, she said softly. My chest tightened. Of course he did. He deserved that, even if it meant losing something with me. And you? I asked. She hesitated. I think he needs to, she said, for himself. I nodded slowly. I understand, even if it hurt, even if it terrified me. Because this wasn't just about finding someone. It was about redefining everything. Will you come? She asked suddenly. I looked at her. What if he goes to meet them? She said. Will you come with us? The question caught me off guard. I don't think that's my place, I said. She shook her head. I think it is, she said, more than anyone else's. I didn't know what to say, because part of me wanted to run from it, to stay in my safe, familiar world where things hadn't changed. But another part, a quieter, braver part, knew that if I didn't face this now, I might lose everything for good. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded. That's all I'm asking. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door. I know you think I took something from you, she said. I didn't respond. But maybe, she added softly, this is a chance to find something too. Then she left. And I stood there, holding that envelope in my hands, staring at the names-velope in my hands, staring at the names inside. A past I had buried. A truth I had avoided. And now, a future I couldn't ignore. Because somewhere out there was a life that had crossed mine for just one night. And somehow, we were about to meet again. The drive to Ohio felt longer than any road I had ever taken. Not because of the distance, but because of what waited at the end of it. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his reflection faint against the glass. Lauren was in the back, quieter than I had ever seen her, her usual confidence replaced with something more cautious. And me, I was behind the wheel, holding on to it, like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. None of us spoke much. There were moments, small ones, when Ethan would shift like he wanted to say something. But the words never came. Because what do you say on the way to meet the life that could have been yours? After hours on the road, We finally pulled into a quiet suburban neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns. The kind of place where everything looks calm on the outside. But I knew better. Because sometimes the biggest truths live behind the most ordinary doors. I slowed the car as we approached the address Lauren had given us. A modest house, white siding, blue shutters, a small porch with 2 chairs. It looked peaceful. Too peaceful. "This is it?" Lauren said softly. Ethan nodded, but he didn't move. Neither did I. For a moment, we just sat there. 3 people suspended between past and future. "Do you want to wait in the car?" Ethan asked, suddenly turning to me. The question was gentle, careful, but I could hear what he was really asking. "Do you want to be part of this, or not?" My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I'll come," I said. Because if I didn't face this now, I never would. We got out of the car together. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last. Ethan reached the door first. He hesitated, then knocked. A few seconds passed, then the door opened. A woman stood there, mid-30s, brown hair pulled back loosely, soft eyes. And something about her, something that made my breath catch. Not because I recognized her, but because I didn't. And yet, I felt like I should. "Hi," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "Can I help you?" Ethan swallowed. "Are you Sarah Collins?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes." He hesitated, then said the words that changed everything. "I think I might be your brother." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Sorry," Lauren stepped forward slightly, her voice calm. "We contacted you earlier this week," she said, "about the DNA match." Recognition flickered in Sarah's eyes. "Oh," she said quietly. "That was..." "You?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." Sarah looked at all 3 of us now, her gaze lingering on me for just a second longer than the others, like she was trying to place something she couldn't quite understand. "Well," she said slowly, stepping back. "You should come in." The house was simple, warm, lived in. Family photos lined the walls. And as I walked inside, I couldn't help but notice something. There was a picture on the shelf. A young girl, brown hair, bright eyes, and something in her expression, something that felt painfully familiar. I looked away quickly. Sarah led us into the living room. "Please sit," she said. We did, though sitting felt like the wrong word. We were barely settled before the questions began. "I don't understand," Sarah said, looking at Ethan. "My parents never mentioned anything like this." Ethan shook his head. "Mine didn't either," he said. "At least, not directly." Her eyes shifted to me. "And you are." The question hit me harder than I expected. Who was I? Now, I swallowed. Jenna," I said. "I raised him." It was the only way I could say it, because anything else felt uncertain. Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "So what exactly are we talking about here?" Lauren explained. Carefully, clearly. The hospital mix-up, the birth certificate, the DNA results. As she spoke, I watched Sarah's face change. Confusion, disbelief, and then something deeper, something emotional. "So you're saying," she began, her voice quieter now, "that the baby my parents brought home might not have been theirs?" Ethan nodded. "And the baby my mom brought home might not have been hers," he added. The room fell silent again. But this time, it felt different. Not tense, not confrontational, just overwhelming. Sarah sat back slightly, processing. My parents are both gone, she said softly. They passed a few years ago. Something inside me twisted, because that meant there was no one left to explain, no one left to fill in the gaps. So we can't even ask them, Ethan said quietly. She shook her head. No. Another silence, heavier this time. Final. Sarah looked at Ethan again, then smiled slightly. It's strange, she said. I always felt like something didn't quite fit. Growing up, I never really looked like them. Not exactly. My heart skipped. And now, she added, glancing at him. Looking at you, and it kind of makes sense. Ethan let out a small, nervous laugh. Yeah, he said. I was thinking the same thing. They shared a look, and in that moment I saw it, a connection. New, fragile, but real. And it hurt more than I expected, because I wasn't part of it. I was just watching. Sarah turned to me again. You said you raised him? She asked gently. I nodded. Yes. She studied my face for a moment, then smiled. Then you're still his mother, she said. The words caught me off guard, but biologically, I began. She shook her head. That's not the only thing that matters, she said. Ethan looked at her, then at me, and for the first time since all of this began, something in his expression softened. Not completely, but enough. We're going to have to figure this out, he said quietly. Sarah nodded. Yeah, she agreed. We are. And as I sat there watching the two of them begin something new, I realized something important. This wasn't just about what I might lose. It was also about what could be found, even if it didn't include me the way it used to, even if it changed everything. Because sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a family. It reshapes it. And now we were standing at the very beginning of that change. We stayed at Sarah's house longer than I expected. Not because anyone insisted, but because none of us knew how to leave. Conversations started in fragments, small, cautious pieces of information exchanged like fragile glass. What was your childhood like? Sarah asked Ethan at one point, leaning forward slightly, her curiosity soft, not intrusive. Ethan hesitated, then answered slowly. Simple, he said. My mom worked a lot. Sewing. She did everything herself. I felt my chest tighten. Sarah smiled faintly. That sounds like my mom, too. She worked at a diner for years. There was something almost surreal about it. Two lives, running parallel, never crossing. Until now. And your dad, Ethan asked? Sarah shook her head gently. He left when I was little. I barely remember him. The words landed quietly, but they echoed loudly inside me, because suddenly the pieces started to align. Not perfectly, but enough to make something inside me shift. Ethan glanced at me for a moment. Just a moment. But it was enough, because in that look, there was no accusation, just understanding. A fragile, emerging kind of understanding. We spent the next hour going through old photos. Sarah brought out a worn album, placing it on the coffee table between us. These are from when I was growing up, she said. Ethan leaned in. I stayed back at first, afraid of what I might see, afraid of what I might feel. But eventually, I moved closer, because I had to. Page after page, we saw glimpses of a life that could have been different. Sarah as a child, birthday parties, school pictures, family vacations. And then, one photo made all of us pause. It was Sarah at about 5 years old, standing in a backyard, wearing a simple dress, her hair slightly messy, her smile wide and unguarded. And something about her expression, it hit me like a wave. That, I whispered, my voice catching. Ethan looked at me. What? I shook my head slightly. It's just... I paused. You looked like that when you were little. Sarah blinked. Really? Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I did. They both looked at the photo again. And in that moment, there was no denying it. Not logically, not emotionally. There was a connection. A real one. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was witnessing something being restored. Later that afternoon, we sat outside on the porch. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting everything in a soft golden light. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. This is a later noon. We sat outside on the porch. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting everything in a soft golden light. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. This is a lot, she admitted. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said. It is. She glanced at him. But I'm glad you came, she added. He looked at her. Me too. I sat quietly beside them, listening, watching. And for once, I didn't feel like an outsider. Not completely. Because even though this connection wasn't mine, I was still part of the story. Still part of what had brought them here. After a while, Sarah turned to me. Can I ask you something? She said gently. I nodded. Of course. She hesitated, then asked the question I had been expecting. Did you ever think about finding out? The honesty of it caught me off guard. Yes, I said. Her eyes softened, and I was afraid I admitted. Of what I looked at Ethan, then back at her. Of losing him, I said simply. The truth of it hung in the air, unfiltered, unprotected. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand that, she said, and I believed her, because she had lost something too. A life she never knew. A mother she never had, in the way she should have. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat. You didn't lose me, he said suddenly. I looked at him, my heart catching. Not completely, he added. The words weren't perfect. They weren't a full reassurance, but they were something. And right now, something was enough. Lauren stepped outside, then joining us quietly. She had been inside, giving us space, something I hadn't expected from her. She stood near the doorway for a moment before speaking. We should probably head back soon, she said gently. No urgency, no pressure, just awareness. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said. Sarah stood up. I'm really glad we met, she said, looking at him. He smiled slightly. Me too. They hugged, awkward at first, then a little tighter. And as I watched them, I felt something shift inside me again. Not loss, not entirely, something else. Acceptance. Because this wasn't replacing anything. It was adding to it, expanding it. And maybe that was okay. Before we left, Sarah turned to me one last time. I meant what I said earlier, she said. About what you're still his mother? She replied. My throat tightened. Thank you, I whispered. She smiled, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes. Not resentment, not confusion, just kindness. As we walked back to the car, the air felt different. Lighter. Not because everything was resolved, but because something had begun. Ethan opened the passenger door, then paused. He looked at me. "Mom," he said. The word hit me harder than anything else that day. "Yeah?" I replied. He hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm glad you came." Tears filled my eyes. "Me too," I said. And as we drove away, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. Maybe I hadn't lost him. Maybe we were just learning how to find each other again. In a new way. One that didn't erase the past, but didn't let it define everything either. And for the first time since the truth came out, I felt something close to peace. Coming home felt different. Not empty, not broken. Just changed. The house looked exactly the same curtains, the same worn furniture, the same quiet corners that had held my life for decades. But something inside me had shifted. Or maybe something inside me had finally settled. I set my keys down on the table and stood there for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me. This time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. A few days passed before I heard from Ethan again. I didn't rush it. I didn't push. Because I had learned something important through all of this. Some things need space to heal. And then one afternoon, my phone rang. "Mom." Just that one word. And suddenly, everything in my chest softened. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was wondering," he hesitated, "if I could come by." "Of course," I replied immediately. This time when he walked through the door, something was different. Not fixed, but warmer. More real. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. We didn't avoid it. We sat down in the living room, the same place where everything had begun, and just talked. "I've been seeing Sarah," he said. I nodded. "I figured. She's good," he added. "Kind. We're still figuring things out." I smiled faintly. "I'm glad." He looked at me, then really looked. "I don't know what this makes everything," he admitted. "You don't have to," I said gently. "But I do know one thing," he continued. I waited. "You're still my mom." The words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Not loud, not dramatic, but warm, steady, real. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "Thank you," I whispered. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Thank you." We sat there for a while, not saying much. And for the first time in weeks, silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like peace. Lauren came by later that evening. She stood in the doorway for a moment, almost hesitant. A version of her I had never seen before. "Hi, Jenna," she said softly. "Lauren," I replied. There was no tension this time. No sharp edges, just understanding. "I owe you an apology," she said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. For what I asked. For how I handled everything she admitted. I pushed. I assumed. I thought I was helping, but I didn't consider what it would cost you. "I consider what it would cost you." I studied her for a moment, and then I nodded. "Thank you," I said. She exhaled like she had been holding that in for a while. "I still believe the truth matters," she added carefully. "I know," I said, "and I'm glad we found it." Studied her for a moment, and then I nodded. "Thank you," I said. She exhaled like she had been holding that in for a while. "I still believe the truth matters," she added carefully. "I know," I said, "and I'm glad we found it," she continued. "But I also see now that truth isn't just about facts. It's about people." That surprised me, but in a good way. "You've changed," I said. She smiled faintly. "I think we all have." Ethan joined us then, standing between us. Not divided, not torn, just present. And for the first time, we felt like something close to a family again. Different, but still a family. Later that night, after they left, I walked into my bedroom. I opened the closet, reached up to the top shelf, and brought the sewing box down. I sat on the bed and opened it slowly. The familiar creak of the hinges no longer filled me with fear, just memory. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been. The threads, the needles, the small pieces of a life carefully stitched together, and the envelope, the one that had held the truth for so long. I picked it up, held it in my hands, and for a moment, I thought about putting it back, about hiding it again. But I didn't. Instead, I placed it gently at the bottom of the box. Not hidden, not buried, just there. A part of the story, not the whole of it, because that's what I had finally learned. The truth doesn't erase what came before. It doesn't undo love. It doesn't rewrite the years spent holding someone, raising them, being there for them. It simply adds another layer, another thread, and life. Life is made of all those threads, the messy ones, the broken ones, the beautiful ones, all woven together into something real. I closed the box and ran my fingers over the worn wood. For years, I had protected it like it held everything. But now I understood. It didn't hold everything. It just held a piece. And that was enough. Because everything else was still here, still alive, still growing. And as I turned off the light and walked out of the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not regret, but something quieter, stronger. Hope. Life has a way of revealing truths at the exact moment we're most afraid to face them. Sometimes we spend years, decades even, holding on to secrets, convincing ourselves that silence is protection, that hiding the truth will preserve the love we're afraid to lose. But the truth is, love built on fear is fragile. And yet this story reminds us of something deeper. Love that is lived through years of care, sacrifice, and presence does not disappear when the truth is revealed. It may shake, it may bend, it may even break for a while. But real love finds its way back. Jenna didn't lose her son. She found a new way to be his mother. Ethan didn't lose his identity. He expanded it. And Lauren, who once seemed like the source of conflict, became part of the bridge that brought truth into the light. Because sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who unknowingly help us heal. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a truth that changed everything? Do you believe love is defined by blood or by the life we build together? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional, meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring the moments that shape who we are. You're not alone in your story, and sometimes the ending is just the beginning.